Father McKenzie. I had in my time endured many things in the quiet and underfunded service of the church. You know, leaky roofs, holy hosiery, both that beginning with H and that beginning with W type of holy hosiery, you know. Hostile parish councils, one particularly aggressive ghost. I'm pretty sure that ghost was possessed by a demon of some sort. What I'd not expected, what no seminary, no retreat, no amount of silent prayer could have prepared me for was standing in the drawing room at Professor Simon de Montfort holding me hat in both hands like a man clinging to the last fragile thread of sanity while what I had been told was Satan was lounging on the sofa wearing nothing but woolly socks. Well, they were woolly, well-darned socks, unholy socks. I didn't look above socks, no, absolutely not look, no, don't look. I focused instead on fireplace, a fine Edwardian piece as far as I know anything about architecture. It was certainly tasteful, respectable, and entirely unpossessed. It had a particularly large breast. No, not breasts right now, no. I must calm, yes. I said faintly to no one in particular. Yes, that is a very... I swallowed with a gulp, as I caught the naked lady in my peripheral vision. It's a lovely pair of mantelpieces.
Thank you,
said the professor, who appeared to be arranging cheeses with the same intensity that most men reserve for diffusing explosives. I swallowed right hard. No, don't think about anything being hard. No. And he, again calm. I'd been invited. No. Sort of collected by a young woman with green eyes. Emerald eyes, truly, not metaphor, not like properly emerald. She had eyes like jewellery that had opinions. She'd smiled at me in a way that suggested either great kindness or catastrophic inevitability, and said, "We have a meeting at Manor." I was sure I hadn't, but on checking my Google Calendar, other calendar services are available, I saw it were clearly there. Meeting Lord at Manor. At that time, I'd assumed it was just that, me meeting local Lord at Manor. Sherry, you know, uncomfortable chat about godly things and weather. Always the weather. The English weather. The usual awkward evening would still be more fulfilling than being on my own at home. Fluffy, my pet goldfish, was not the greatest of conversationalists, you know. Seemed that the conversation here at the Manor was, well, it seemed over. Somehow I didn't understand. Somehow I'd been volunteered to bless some items and some of the people that were going to hell. Yeah, you heard that right. Going to hell. No metaphor. The nutters were preparing. No, you're not allowed to say nutters no more, are you? That's wrong. The mentally incapacitated. That was it. It was becoming more and more apparent that I'd made a mistake on leaving house and Fluffy. I risked a glance. Only a small one, a really quick small one, not long, you know. I was not being, you know, I that would be unpriestly. I was just looking at her, just enough to confirm that woman on sofa, who was apparently Lucifer, still looked exactly like Sister O'Connell from St. Bartholomew's Primary, circa 1987. Sister O'Connell, who'd once confiscated me marbles and told me that curiosity was the first step forward toward damnation. Sister O'Connell, who now appeared to be reclining, naked, all large, voluptuous. No, not voluptuous. That was a sexual thing, innit? Word voluptuous. No, she was all voluptuous and pink, so pink. I quickly looked back at mantelpiece with renewed devotion to mantelpieces and ornate metalwork pokers. No, poker. No, don't think about poking it. No. How did I get there? No, I will not engage, I whispered to me sen. My eyes closed against things. I will not engage, I repeated. Around me, the room continued to behave in a manner that suggested either it were full of the insane, I mean the mentally incapacitated, or that reality had quietly resigned. I looked at a young woman who had met us at the door. I tried not to stare. She looked like one of them. She looked like that one out of the film a bit, you know, that one. Rocky's Horror Show Picture or something. The maid one in that, you know, maid. Yeah. I'd watched it once late night when I was a younger man before I'd made choice to join seminary. I'd watched it and enjoyed it. It made me feel a bit, squiffy and a bit iffy. Men comfy in lingerie certainly didn't make me feel comfortable, honest. People think that priests are boring. I had certainly had some crazy days when I was younger. The young woman had what I think the young people call a gothic maid's outfit on, hanging from her gothic tattooed frame. My niece Joni was one of them. No, one of them goth kids. Not like this young woman, though. Joni would just sort of walked around the house in black clothing, looking sad and listening to that bloody music. This werecat was different from that. She wore a black and white lacy heavy boots and had a haircut that could probably cut glass. She moved silently around the room, just doing things. Just doing things like that and bending over to pick things up and things. True temptation. I couldn't ask Satan to get behind me though, because apparently she already was. So vomit was another thing in the room I couldn't look at. Her legs went all the way up, right from floor all the way up, Yeah, to mostly undisguised lacy underwear. She'd been introduced as Vaunt. She'd also been described quite casually as a bloody werecat, just like dropped into conversation, just like that.
Oh, just FYI, Vaunt's a werecat.
Just like that. Why would they say that in front of me? I mean, I could be anyone. I could tell anyone. I could tell any. Well, I could. I really could. But however, if I told anyone, they would think that I'd lost my mind. That I was mental. Mentally incarcerated. That perhaps I was. I decided not to pursue the werecat line of inquiry. I just left that one. Then there was a small creature, something between a lizard, a bat, and a deeply questionable life choice that trailed after Goth, making soft, thoughtful noises. What kind of dog, cat thing is that? I asked Professor before I realised I shouldn't. Before I realised that I didn't want to answer.
That's that's Dave,
said the Professor without looking up.
He's a chupacabra. Don't feed him after midnight unless you enjoy structural damage.
Of course he is. I started because there are moments in a man's life when, of course, is the only available response. Then there were threatening man, Will. Answer him in the way that storms are answered just before they remove roofs. He stood slightly apart from others, smiling at Nout in particular, as though he were listening to a joke only he could hear. Perhaps he were. There was something about him, something that made the air around him feel threatening, He'd been introduced as a werewolf. I actually just believed this flippant statement entirely. Not because it made sense, but because nothing else did, so why not? Of course, bloody werewolf. And then, mercifully, there were Wing Commander Montgomery Fortescue, retired, stood with the calm assurance of a man who had seen the end of the world several times and filed it appropriately. He held a glass in one hand and what appeared to be some sort of sword in the other, as though both were equally necessary in the evening. Which, for him, I suppose he were.
"Oh, Father,"
he said with a polite nod.
Jolly good of you to come. Bit of a situation, I'm afraid. Nothing too alarming, old chap. Just a sojourn to hell for a bit of a battle."
He rattled what I found out later was his sabre. Just going to hell for a bit of a battle? I repeated softly to myself.
"Right. Damn fine port, what?"
he replied before sipping and appreciating his port. As though this were now unusual in this conversation. It was just right, wasn't it? I were proper nonplussed. Items began to appear on desk, not gradually, not sensibly. They were simply there: guns, old and new, swords, blades that seemed to hum quietly when not being watched, relics, some recognisably holy, others less so. A book was there that I was fairly certain had just blinked. I stared at it. It stared back. Didn't have any bloody eyes, did it? How could it stare back? That's not possible. So I firmly decided that it hadn't.
"Right,"
said the Professor, straightening.
"We should proceed."
"Proceed?" I echoed.
With a blessing, dear chap, I think,
said the wing commander kindly.
You know, before we actually descend.
Descend? I repeated.
To hell what?
Yeah, I gathered that, I said bemused. There are moments when a priest must choose between theology and survival, and this were one of those, weren't it? Well, here goes, a blessing. I set down my hat, I straightened my collar and drew myself up to my full less than average height, and I began to pray. I knew how to do that. I knew how to pray. Maybe God were testing me, weren't he? Maybe I would get some evidence of him helping me. I managed to keep my voice steady at first, and it became stronger as my confidence grew, and rather unexpectedly, my voice became firm. The words came as he always had, familiar, anchoring, a thread of order in room that had abandoned the concept of order entirely. I didn't look at sofa. I did not think about Sister O'Connell's woolly socks. I dismissed the maid's lacy underwear. I under no circumstances consider the possibility the devil was listening to this politely. I just simply prayed. And for a moment, room seemed to settle. When I finished, there was a small, respectful silence.
Bravo! Fine bit of praying there, well done,
said the wing commander.
Very stirring.
Lucifer, Sister O'Connell smiled faintly.
Charming,
she said. I felt this was in some ineffable way a poor review. 3.2 stars from Devil. The wing commander stepped forward and pressed something into my hand, a small lip flask.
Oh, just a little present here for you, Father. Holy water,
he said.
Blessed by the Pope himself, what's his face, very rare. Do keep it on you, you might need it, what?
I looked at Flask and at Wing Commander and considered briefly that the vast terrifying possibility that this might actually be true. Thank you, sort of squeaked, because courage is sometimes indistinguishable from politeness in sort of English laugh. It felt like moment now to step back, and I just did a step back, clutching Flask as others they gathered their weapons in confidence. I had no idea what were happening, and strongly suspected that none of them did either. That none of them was entirely sane, mentally incapacitated. That's right, innit? I was increasingly certain that I would not survive the evening, and yet my duty were done. I'd given blessing. And if these mad, dangerous, impossible people were truly going to hell, well, at least someone had thought to pray a bit first.
Lucifer. I'm not known by nature, or anything else, to be an impatient being. I've been a being working behind the scenes for some centuries now. I'd, after all, overseen the slow moral decline of entire civilizations. I'd watched empires rot at a pace that could only be described as geologically irritating. I understand delays. Patience, in my case, is not a virtue. It is a tool. I respected timing. But this was taking the absolute piss. Trudeau, my little secretary cat, demon type thing, had even gone to sleep, and she was known to be able to outstare the statues of saints. Right, I said, cupping my hands once with the crisp authority that the professor had a few minutes ago. In you go. I tried to shepherd people, even though I was known devoutly as the non-shepherd in the religious beings cast of characters. That was Big J's job. Mostly. The cupboard in the corner, still venting a deeply offensive amount of steam into the professor's bloody wallpaper, stood open, revealing the infernal lift within.
Lucy,
Yes, Simon, your bloody wallpaper. I know. But I'm thinking of burning this entire place down right now. Wallpaper would be the least of your worries if you mention flocked wallpaper once more. So, get in the sodding lift. The lift that hummed faintly, like something that disapproved of existence.
No, I just need a moment to...
began the professor, clutching his satchel as though it might file a complaint on his behalf. I yelled. The room fell silent as everyone regarded me, mouths open. That regard included Simon's relatives from earlier centuries in the oil paintings on the wall. I froze. I had shown a chink in my armour. Trudeau was now very awake and looking at me with an expression that was as close to concern as a small black cat can offer. In through the nose and out through the mouth, boss, she told me, as she dropped onto the floor and circled my ankles, trying her best to calm me with her feline fortitude and flow against my skin. Calm down. We don't want the 1200s to happen again, do we? You know how long it takes things to settle down when you lose, it, said my little demon. I've never lost, I told the cat, holding back the it. Of course not, boss. Those plagues and stuff were just due to an unlucky century. She tried to mollify me. She could mollify me. Thank all that is unholy. I am calm, I partially yelled, showing all that I really wasn't, then instantly became composed and turned to address the dumbstruck professor. You've had several centuries of moments, Simon, I told the bloody man before physically steering him by the shoulder.
But I haven't dealt with the cheeses.
Into the lift, they will not escape, I promise. I tried to use a chirpy, upbeat tone, but failed. Will, for his part, strolled quite happily into the steaming box.
Ooh, hell lift,
he said, peering around with interest before pushing all the bastarding buttons, including, in this case, my own.
Oh, a bit cramped, innit? Not like one I remember. It's efficient,
came Fenrir's voice, amused, like a coffin with ambition.
Don't start,
muttered Will. The wing commander stepped in next, adjusting his jacket.
Rather snug,
he observed.
Reminds me of the troop carrier over Cyprus. 87. Marginally less screaming, though.
I'm not screaming,
said the professor. You're whinging and will be screaming if you don't get in the bloody lift, I said pleasantly, and gave him a small push with a strength that could shift tectonic coastal plates. That settled the matter. He went in. The doors slid shut with a thankful finality that suggested appeals would not be considered. There was a pause. Nothing. And then the lift dropped. Not down, precisely. More like away. Silence. Steam curled lazily in the aftermath, like a dragon that had briefly considered redecorating. I sighed. Not a job well done, but a job done. The drawing room, so recently full of purpose, irritation, and cheese, felt suddenly full of awkward. I mean, the British are always awkward, but most of the true Britishness had left the building for warmer climes. I stood feeling grateful that they had gone with my hands on my hips. Luck was looking at the empty space in the cupboard. She stood nearby, looking as though she'd just remembered she'd left something important in another dimension. That did tend to be Luck's look, though. Sorry, too many looks in those sentences. Vaunt drifted silently past, adjusting a cushion that didn't need adjusting. The priest remained exactly where he was, clutching his hat, his soul, and a rapidly diminishing sense of proportion.
Well,
said Luck. Yes, I said. We both nodded, as though this had clarified everything. It had not. Lucy. Father McKenzie cleared his throat.
Perhaps
he ventured.
We might discuss
No.
the very real theological implications
No.
of what just happened.
Both Luck and I turned to him and gave him a resounding stereophonic no. He paused. I could see that he felt that this was not an encouraging conversational dynamic. Just to add to his confusion and horror, Dave the Chupacabra padded up to him and made a soft, hopeful chirp. The priest looked down into that perpetual nightmare of a face. Dave looked up. There was a moment, a connection, a silent understanding between man and whatever that was. The poor man felt that he and Dave were on the same level in this room. I could see it. Even so, he very carefully did not pet him.
I will not.
He whispered to the goat-killing bloodsucker. Dave persisted. I had orchestrated wars, temptations, and entire theological frameworks. I hadn't, until this moment, had to plan the intermission. I hadn't thought that far ahead, I admitted.
I never do.
They really didn't have a plan, did they?
I never do.
There was a significant pause.
A board game?
Suggested Luck. I gave Luck a look. Use dice with you, I laughed. I think not. Thankfully, at that precise point, the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. Saved by the bell, I announced with an audible sigh of relief. Vaunt, dear? The werecat nodded once and drifted off to answer it, boots thudding silently against the polished floor. How did she do that? Thud silently. Father McKenzie at this point had given up on anything as profound as reason and took the opportunity to do the only reasonable thing and sit down and hold himself in a personal hug of self-comfort. He poured himself a glass of port with the careful precision of a man who had decided that whatever else happened, he would face it with adequate fortification before offering a bemused smile to all present. Dave climbed halfway onto his knee. The priest stared straight ahead. Funny how he would not look at me. I looked down to see his view of what I presented to him. Oh yes, maybe he shouldn't. Honestly, I didn't want to look at that either.
This is a test.
He murmured to no one in particular. Vaunt returned. Behind us shuffled two zombies in varying states of decay. They carried between them, with surprising care, an enormous box that held an enormous television with dead ease.
Delivery.
He checked a note in his pocket.
The devil, it says here,
Said the zombie in a voice that suggested it had not been consulted in years. The other corrupted corpse tried to talk, but only managed to grunt as its tongue and some teeth fell to the floor on opening its fetid face to speak. Vaunt was instantly there and had already swept the bits up with a rather nifty brush and shovel combo before they hit the floor. The first zombie continued from where his colleague, started.
From Amazon,
He said somewhat proudly. Ah, I said. I paid the extra for installation. I looked around the room, choosing the most annoying spot. Annoying spot for the professor, that is. There always has to be a price paid when dealing with the devil. His wasting of my time meant he had to pay extra in this case. Ah, excellent. Over there. Perfect. I pointed directly at the large portrait above the fireplace. There was a magnificent oil painting of the professor in his former life as an armoured, noble-looking figure, looking deeply disapproving of modern upholstery. You can take that down, I giggled. Yes, I know a giggling devil isn't a typical representation of me, but in this case, it was the right one. The zombies ripped down the masterpiece without ceremony, which was a little thrilling, I must admit. The 12th century Simon de Montfort was unceremoniously pulled at, tilted, and then thrown with a satisfying crunch into a corner, finally settling with a dull, aristocratic thud. Luck winced.
Won't he be upset?
I allowed the display of a lugubrious, yes, lugubrious. That's the perfect description of my smile, a lugubrious smile. Oh, he's going to be fabulously furious. Time passed as we watched the dead perform their work. The television was mounted with surprising efficiency. Cables appeared. I had to allow reality to bend slightly to accommodate them. Within moments, the screen flickered into life. Static, then an image. The inside of the lift.
Look, this is bloody ridiculous. I mean, who the hell does she think she is?
the professor was saying, pressed rather firmly against one wall.
She's a devil, old boy,
Said Monty, who was sniffing at a hip flask before downing a large gulp of its contents, an athlete's preparation.
Yes. True. But there's no ventilation in here.
The professor did something unprofessorly and loosened his tie.
It's a journey to hell, not to a spa, Simon.
Said Will cheerfully.
Bit slow, too.
The professor added, tapping the side.
You'd think Eternal Damnation would have better infrastructure, wouldn't you?
We're moving between layers of existence.
Fenrir observed.
Speed's relevant, isn't it?
I think you mean relative, but it does feel slow.
Said Will. The wing commander adjusted his stance with quiet dignity, offering the flask to Will, which he gratefully received.
Well, I've experienced worse descents, chaps.
Continued Monty.
Though usually I don't call a descent experienced until it stops. The worst descents tend to stop suddenly with, a loss of limbs.
The lift gave a small, ominous shudder.
So, what's the plan?
Asked the professor, accepting the flask from Will. The men and the wolf's soul looked at him.
Is that not your particular line of expertise, Professor?
Asked Monty.
Yes, it tends to be, chaps, but in this case, I have no bloody idea what to do.
Said the wing commander.
Jolly good.
It wasn't. Jolly good, that is. Will looked at both men as he thought.
Don't worry. I've got this. What we do is we get down there and we see what happens.
He said, shrugging his shoulders.
The usual, then.
Said the wolf's soul.
Followed by general fucking up of things.
Fen continued.
Well, it'd be rude not to, eh?
Smiled Will as he snatched back the flask and upended it as he finished its contents. Back in the drawing room, Luck and I settled onto the sofa, glasses in hand, watching. Dave finally succeeded in climbing fully onto the priest's lap. Father McKenzie, after a long and noble struggle, placed one trembling hand on its head.
All right then, just a little pat.
He said. Dave purred. It was deeply unsettling. On the screen, the lift continued its impossible journey. In the room, the fire crackled. The remains of the portrait of Simon de Montfort glowered from the corner. Luck sat on the couch, focusing on the screen. Trudeau sat between us, lounging comfortably. I took a sip of port and smiled. Vaunt poured the contents of a dainty little shovel into the pocket of the corpse it had fallen out of and shooed out the delivery zombies, then drew up a chair. Right, I said. Now it gets interesting.